Hey guys, welcome to the Lunge and Lift podcast. Today we are rejoined by a very special guest, Dr. Phil Price. Phil is an expert in all things hybrid training, and today we talk about the latest updates in training for astronauts, how they can jump in space and the benefits that has on their body. We also talk about science versus social media, how misleading things can be online versus the reality of research, and also the limitations of research in terms of what they actually tell us about training and fitness. And we also go back into the weeds on hybrid training, what sort of experiments we can run, and what do we actually know about the interference effect. But before we get into it, as always, a big thank you to our show sponsors, Rob's Strength Formula. Don't forget to click the link in the description box below to get your 7-day free trial to Rob's Strength Formula program, which is your answer to the strength and muscle building equation. Also, thank you to thetrainingstimulus.com. Please check out the website to get your free guide to movement mechanics. And also a big thank you to ZAAGsupplements.com, our favorite daily supplement. ZAAG is a liquid gel shot with 29 vitamins, nootropics, and adaptogens that have significantly improved our concentration and help us perform in our training too. Use our discount code DISCLIFT20 to get 20% off your 2-week trial pack. DISCLIFT20. Right, let's get into it. Phil, welcome back to the show. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me back. I've enjoyed round one, so looking forward to round two.
Yeah, same as us. How have you been? So since we last spoke to you, you became a father. How's dad life treating you?
Yeah, dad life is class. It's hard work, which I'm sure everyone will say, but it's amazing. It's amazing how your perception on things completely change as soon as you got a little one there. Like even things like my own personal goals, they remain relatively similar, but there's like a extra drive or extra pressure on top of it because it's like, well, everything I want is because I believe in my head that's going to create the lifestyle that I believe is perfect for my wife and my child. So, yeah, there's that extra. Pressure is probably the wrong word. I think it's pressure just because you put it on yourself, but the drive to, you know, work even harder, even to the point where if I get distracted by my phone, I just get a little bit angry. It's like, what am I doing that for? Like, you know, everything that I'm doing is going toward providing this life for this child, and it's really enjoyable. It's just a lot to fit in because the mornings and evenings are now taken up with being daddy. So all that extra work has to find a different way to get in, but it's all worth it.
It's funny you say about the phone thing. I get that a lot as well. It's like I'll be just like a notification will come through or whatever, like a message will come through, and I'll look at it and I'll start replying, and I get this like sense of just like frustration. I just put the phone away somewhere else because it's only because I know how much they take everything on board. So if they're seeing you constantly look at this little thing in your hand that they obviously perceive to be more important than them, it's like, what does that create later on in life and stuff like that? Like my daughter's now 4.5, nearly 5, and just even like seeing the influence of like just stuff that she watches, the stuff that like, now she's at school, the influence of other kids and stuff like that. Just like, fuck, like, there's a lot I need to be doing to make sure I can at least do the best that I can.
Yeah, I had the first 8 weeks of Billy being born, I just had this real bad relationship with social media in general because I just looked at it and thought everything just feels like everyone's trying to either one up each other. You know, there's other genuine people here around that are trying to put out good content. Yes, there may be like a link, they're trying to link it to something that it might be selling, and that's fine. That's just the way of life. But there is this element of twisting things to make it sound a bit more venomous or trying to put someone else down to elevate their own message. And that felt like it was becoming normal. And I really didn't like it. And I thought, well, my boy's going to come into that life and thinking that is normal. So that's not a way of doing things to me. So I tried to keep away for like the first 8 weeks. I had a real sort of cleanse of it. I'm sort of back now. But I enjoy the community that it provides, but understands there's the negative effects of it. Even to the point where, like you said, Rob, apparently kids recognize when you stare like into your phone, that face of gormlessness. They recognize it and they start reacting to it. So we've been quite hot on it at home to make sure that if you're on social media, just not around the kid.
Yeah.
It's amazing how much you've got to think about these things, which before having kids you just wouldn't.
You just don't. And I think the fact that they are just such a sponge, and it's even though like what you're doing is essentially harmless, like, okay, you're scrolling social media and stuff like that, but as you say, those little things, by being completely like gone in the face, just mind-numbingly scrolling at something, and you get suckered into it. It's like you can't do anything about it, because like it's what it's supposed to do, right? It's supposed to pull you in and attract you to the next one, and then you suddenly realize, like, if to say like Chloe was watching something that's not interesting to me, and I'll then say go on my phone, and then I think, but I'm suddenly like, I should still be trying to pay attention, because again, it's like I might not find what she's watching engaging, but at least if I'm engaged with her watching that, it creates a better situation that then hopefully going down the line is a lot more of a lasting positive thing, and that then she might not then want to do certain things. But it's like, even like looking at her, like when she watches YouTubers of like kids now, how like young YouTubers, I'm just like, it blows my mind. And then she's like, she wants to be one. I'm just like, at what point do I say, okay, you're nearly 5? Like, when does that become okay? Like, she's
the most
creative
popular profession now, isn't it?
It's mental. It's self-employed, right? She's creating something. She wants to create something for her own. It's like she was doing something the other day and pretending basically to be on YouTube, and I was just like, this is mental. Like, but I'm like, at what point do I support it? And like, as a parent, because it's nowadays it is a profession and it is a thing. If she can like create a craft early doors, like, is that gonna will that be a positive thing? So
yeah, it's very attractive, isn't it? Because technically you've got full control over what you do, so it must be really attractive to young people. You're not getting into a job where you've got people above that you've got to at least follow orders or work together with. Like, at first you're creating something yourself, and with that there's the attraction of, you could probably, if it goes well and you're consistent, see financial benefits very quickly, rather than getting a graduate scheme and work your way up with your annual salary. So you can definitely see it, but
total control within certain parameters, though. That's the
very true.
Big caveat.
It's really interesting to mention to you, because they all call them creators, and I started, maybe this was during my 8-week period of hating social media, but I was thinking, there's probably quite a few genuine creators out there, but ultimately what I was seeing was people creating things not because they thought it was good, but they thought it would grab attention of others. And truly great work never really occurs if you've got someone else in mind, or you have like a rough demographic that you are trying to go towards. But if you try to tailor everything you were doing based on how everyone was thinking or feeling, you're probably not going to create something that was unique. So this idea of creator feels a bit vague or false, because people are doing things based on an algorithm. And there's, if you're doing something unique, you have the chance that it might be amazing, but no one's going to see it. But does that matter? It can still be great. Be interesting to see what your thoughts are.
Yeah, that's a very, very good distinction. I like it a lot. So I thought about this through a similar lens, in that there are people that come up with ideas and original material, and then there are other people with a slightly different skill set who are good at marketing and spreading the message. So there's almost like two classes of content creator: those that create original content and those that are good at spreading messages. And you see it a lot in podcast hosts, where podcast hosts quite often have very little original thought or thought ideas or points of view, but they're really good at bringing on people who do have those original points of view, and then that gets absorbed into the podcast host's standard chat. So they've almost assumed their guests' knowledge and points of view as their own, and then exactly. And any new listener who hears this podcast host thinks they're amazing, because they've essentially cherry-picked the sound bites that are best from their guests over time. And that is a valuable service. Like, they're essentially creating a one-stop shop for a diverse range of knowledge from a diverse range of experts. But like you say, they are not the creators of that information or those points of view. They are just aggregators. And I think that's something I've seen in the sort of technology sphere over the years. It's not necessarily about the origination of something. It's about making it convenient for somebody else to consume. And I was listening to a podcast where somebody was doing something this exact same thing, talking about the basically online travel agents. There's so many of them, like Expedia, Booking.com, and whatever else, where you just go on, or Skyscanner, but they all draw information from I can't remember what it's called now, but there's one underlying system which essentially coordinates with the airlines, with the hotels, drags in all this messy data, makes it nice and clean for Expedia, Booking.com, and Skyscanner to work from. So they're actually doing all the legwork, but they get a fraction of the revenue that these online travel agents do, because they just make it convenient for the customer, and that's where the margins are made. And I think the same sort of thing is happening with points of view. And
I think insurance companies do that as well, which is vultures, a lot of them.
Yeah.
It's interesting you said that, actually, because obviously being podcast hosts, all three of us, what I've found is I've probably absorbed a lot of information, but at the same time, I think it's led me to realize just how much I don't know. And it's led me to read around certain things, and it's led me to probably try and seek out speaking to other people. So you can imagine that for some people it might be that, but maybe that's me just like, the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. And the podcast has really allowed me to see that in myself. So I guess, that's something, I guess, positive I feel has come from my aggregating.
Definitely. I genuinely think it's a really valuable service. But I think where it gets murky is when you start claiming that as your original thought. Like there's some podcast hosts where they might put bits in their newsletter which are uncredited, and they're direct quotes from some of their guests. You're just plagiarizing somebody else's bits now. Just at least give them a shout out to say, this guy opened my eyes to this way of thinking or this perspective. That's just, I think, the nature of the beast, isn't it?
Have you seen Good Will Hunting?
Yep.
The film. And you know that scene where the guy is like, have you read this? Or have you read this? Then Matt Damon comes along and is like, are you going to have an original thought at all? I feel there's a lot of that going on. People are quite good, and especially when they speak in quotes.
Yeah, exactly.
Quote here, quote here. Just don't really know what's going on. I've just been hit with quotes.
Yeah. I mean, this is one of the things we want to talk about today. But maybe before we do, let's finish your update. How have you been getting on with your space research? I wanted to ask about the zero gravity training.
Yeah. So I don't know how much I went into detail with it last
Maybe
time.
Give a quick overview for anyone who didn't catch the first episode.
So at St Mary's University, we've been very lucky to work with Physical Mind London. So the owner of Physical Mind London is John Kennett, who has invented a jump sled, technically. Quite similar to a Pilates machine, but also very, very different as well with how it's made and that type of thing. So the idea is that what we've been looking at is that maybe we could use this supine jump sled as a way of incorporating plyometric or reactive type exercise for astronauts while they're in space. Because ultimately what we're trying to do when they're in space is to avoid the amount of deconditioning that happens because they have no gravity constantly sort of pressing on them. Muscle, bone is very active tissue that requires load to sort of regenerate itself, and especially in terms of strength. So we've been investigating that. And the first time we went out for a parabolic flight, so you've got those planes which go along, then they climb themselves up, and then they hit the apex, this parabola, and then they plummet 2.5K towards the Earth's surface before pulling out. So you go through this period of like, okay, I'm at 1G, so normal gravitation on the Earth's surface, into double G, into 0G, into double G, back to 1. So that's where people start to feel a bit sick, and why it's called the vomit comet, because I think you're just going in and out of just different levels of gravitation. So when we were there the first time, we investigated jumping, and it was very much just an explorative study because no one had jumped in microgravity like that before. There are certain methods that we can do on the Earth's surface to try and mimic that. And there has been microgravity studies happen before, but none that has done jumping in this way. So that was cool to be involved with, because we were literally seeing jumping for the first time in microgravity. And then this time round, we've done some additional analysis on it. I didn't actually go because it was only about 6-7 weeks after the birth of my first child. So what was quite cool is they were collecting data during the flights, and then it would get uploaded to Dropbox, which then got me access. So I did data analysis back here in the UK to try and help them understand what has happened. And luckily it was quite good, because they decided to make a few changes on flight 2 and flight 3 based on what they were seeing earlier on. So that was, really, it's all a great thing to be a part of. And so really what's next about it is we got to see if we can get it's known as HiFi, high frequency impulse microgravity, the jump said, into a spaceship, essentially. So there is the Lunar Gateway coming up. So that is they want to get a manned space shuttle that's going to be going around the moon, just like the International Space Station, but for the moon. The idea is around 2024, 2025, I reckon 2025. So they need obviously training equipment there. And they're making a new International Space Station. So what's happening by 2030 is that all the stuff in the current International Space Station is going to be taken off. And then the next year, the International Space Station is going to be sort of like allowed to drop into the Earth's atmosphere, where it will burn up before it reaches the ground. So they want to create a new one. So we're going to have to generate new exercise countermeasures for that piece of that spacecraft. So hopefully it will be this piece of equipment. But there are a lot of different companies that are providing competing exercise countermeasures. You've also got people looking into if we can get to Mars. So it's going to take a while to get there. I can't remember exactly how long it would take, but I thought, I want to say 2 years, but I could be wildly wrong there. But ultimately, normally when people have like a time in the International Space Station, the typical stint is 6 months. And that can create a level of deconditioning, which could be problematic when they reach the Earth's surface, because they then got to walk and be exposed to this gravity and the body's not used to it. So it isn't just you're trying to reduce the deconditioning, you're trying to reduce it so they don't get really badly hurt by the time they get back on the Earth's surface. So if we're going to Mars, that's much, much longer. So you need exercise equipment to not only reduce deconditioning over a long period of time, but then you've got to set up a habitual place to live where you are exercising and getting used to the new levels of gravitation on Mars. So yeah, there's a lot of scope for this type of machinery. So we're in a very exciting time.
That's super cool. Do you know what the gravity, how many G on Mars?
I think it's 0.7, I think, compared to Earth. I'm sure it's 0.7. I think Moon is 0.4. So they can actually, with the parabolic flight, they can kind of change the sort of the angle and stuff like that to try and mimic different levels of gravitation. So you don't necessarily go into zero gravity, you go into 0.4 gravity, something like that. So you can be able to see if there's any difference between, like, I guess, jumping on the moon versus jumping on the Earth's surface to jumping in the middle of space. Okay. So there's a lot of questions to answer, because it's a difficult situation, because the only real way of assessing what actually happens is when you're out in space. Well, we don't really have access to that, so we're going to have to find other ways of doing that. And that's either through the parabolic flights or bed rest studies, which sound horrible to be a part of.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah. Do you know what the current protocols are for astronauts? Like, how often are they training? How many hours? What sort of movements are they doing? What does that look like?
Yeah, currently in the International Space Station, it's about 2 hours a day, and it will be a combination of resistance training and aerobic type training, whether through continuous work or through intervals. So they've only got 3 pieces of equipment in the International Space Station. They've got the ARED, which is like it's like a barbell that's attached to mechanical arms, and you can manipulate the system to either do deadlifts, squats. It's a cool piece of kit, but it's big. So if you wanted to do anything that's relatively dynamic, it's those types of exercises with that. Then you've got the there's a bike, and then there's a treadmill. But underneath the treadmill, they've got like a 900 kilo vibration isolation unit, because what you don't want is every time you land during your run, that vibration force then gets transferred to the spacecraft, which can damage it. So it's got to be sitting on top of something, and it's limited to how fast it can go. Otherwise, it's going to damage the spacecraft. So that's why jumping and using the supine sled is really appealing to a lot of scientists creating the new International Space Station, because the idea is that it's isolating the vibration, because you've got two carriages that go in apart and then coming back together. That keeps the vibration in the system. It's not getting transferred to the rest of the craft. So we're doing sensitivity analysis to investigate that for our piece of equipment currently. So and things look good, but I can't actually say anything about that at the moment. That's under wraps. Because of back to astronauts training. Usually it's around, the first half is like resistance training, and then the second half is like aerobic type training. But that's why we're looking at jumping, because we might be able to reduce the amount of time that they spend training, because for an astronaut that has to do a lot of other things, 2 hours per day is quite a lot.
Just curiosity, and I feel a bit silly but you know, like flywheel training and stuff like that type of resistance, and like you see like the new, like they've got it at WIT, you know, that what is that thing, like
I was thinking that as he said, squat, bench press.
Yeah,
not Virtus.
Virtuso or Virtusio or something like that. Basically, it's, imagine like you can get a bar and it's got cables, and like you can add the resistance, and so I'm just like, would something like that work in space? Because it's essentially like, it's because then that weighs next to nothing. I'm just like, it must. I feel like it can't be. I've just thought of that. So that's just, so why is that not being utilized, or what? Yeah.
No, it's a very good question. The answer is they are looking into it. They're looking at the flywheel as an option for in space, because of the large eccentric component that it can provide, and a lot of time under stress or under tension, which we know that of the sort of neuromuscular benefits that come with eccentric training, that can be very beneficial for especially muscle and tissue. They're definitely looking at as an option. I know that they are looking at various options, and they will make a decision based on how much space they have available. So they could have hi-fi and a flywheel and maybe, I don't know, a bike. So that means you've got options for aerobic work, reactive work, and sort of heavy or eccentric work. You can probably get eccentric work from obviously landing. But hopefully the idea is that this is going to provide enough stress that's going to improve or maintain their aerobic capacity, and it will be able to generate enough muscular and gravitational, or mimic gravitational force, which is required to create strain and bone strain, which is how the body responds to try and maintain or reduce deconditioning. Because if you think about it, like if we're jumping on the sled, the force vector that's created by that is going to go straight through the body, and the areas of the body which are most susceptible to bone deconditioning is the femoral neck and the lumbar spine. So the direction of the vector will hopefully go through that and actually improve sort of bone strength in those areas, so to reduce the chance of any particular bone injury or brittleness. So by that we might be able to create both those types of forces, but have things that can manipulate and change the direction of the force with the force vector. So it will create, through creating a training program, that would generate a variety of different stresses that place on the body, and hopefully that can reduce the amount of deconditioning, particularly in problematic areas.
Why is that part really susceptible to like breakdown in space?
I think the areas that are particularly, a combination of areas that are loaded a lot due to gravity, especially particularly the lumbar spine, and then if you take that completely away, it doesn't have that ability to maintain its size and strength. I also think it's because say you've got your femur and you've got your femoral neck comes in at an angle, doesn't it? Depending on obviously your hip morphology. Because of that, it can. I think it will yeah, because of that, because you've got large forces going through it, but at an angle, whereas ideally you want it to go in line with the direction of the femur. So I guess you're thinking of the force vector going in line with the shaft of the femur. Then all of a sudden you've got that force transferred on an offshoot. Because of that, it's going to create a different levels of strain on that particular area. There's not going to be any growth plates there, so it's not like a youth athlete or something like that. But I think it's a combination of just the morphology might influence that particular area.
That's cool. And is that what you see in astronauts coming back from the International Space Station after 6 months? They get like fractured lumbar vertebrae, or they get femur fractures. Is that the sort of thing that's going on now that you're trying to resolve?
I haven't heard personally of any that have occurred, but they have reported that bone mineral density is reduced quite considerably in those particular areas. So I guess they're at risk of that. On top of that, because they don't really have too much reactive type forces, if you've got the body's ability to act with the strength, stretch shortening cycle, cool. And if you don't use it, you tend to lose it as well. So they are, I guess you're going through slight gait retraining to not only retrain the skill, but also get the tissue conditioning back. So hopefully, if you're constantly sort of like doing that repetitive motion in space, hopefully they can try and maintain that as much as possible.
Yeah, I remember when Ross Edgley finished one of his mammoth swims. He was swimming like non-stop, or like just on a boat or swimming for months, and he could barely stand because he hadn't been standing on his feet for any longer than a few minutes at a time, because he just sat on the boat eating or swimming for weeks and months, and it took him ages to get his feet just strong enough again to stand and walk without pain. And it is very much use it or lose it in those sorts of situations.
So was that the one where you went around the UK?
Yeah.
Yeah, because you could look at that and think, oh, well, he's on the boat, he's still getting exposed to gravity. What's the problem? But you're taking away half of his time under gravity in a way. And there's been some links to differences in bone mineral density in certain areas between like swimmers and cyclists and runners, because they spend so much time in the water on the bike. Their experiences of loading is different to a runner, so their bone mineral density is different. So yeah, you can really see it. And I guess he took over 100 days to perform that, didn't he? So yeah, that's a lot of time lacking gravity, which obviously builds up.
Totally. And I see it in people who just don't get enough steps in, like the loss of balance and stability for people who they might train an hour a day, they might train hard and be in really good shape. But if they're like some people getting like 2,000 steps a day because they work from home and don't go anywhere, and they invariably have terrible balance and stability when they previously wouldn't, because exactly what you say, like, use it or lose it. If you're not spending any time on your feet, the proprioception becomes rusty. And I think there's so many benefits to walking, to zone 2, just time on feet, that literally the time component is massively underestimated, which is why reason why standing desks are so good and all those sorts of things.
Probably wearing cushion trainers as well and all that, so they really are, when they are doing any type of activity, it is completely muffled against the real world.
Yeah, exactly. That's awesome. Okay, that's a nice little segue, I think, into one of the meatier topics we wanted to talk to you about today, Phil, and that is the scientific method. I think going back to our social media discussion before, quite often information gets presented as fact when it's not fact. And even if it has come from research or papers, it's still not conclusive, but it is portrayed as this is definitely truth. And, in all situations, this is the right, the right information. I think it'd be really helpful for listeners. Could you give a brief overview of, it's almost like logic and the scientific method? Like when we do an experiment, what are the key things to the layman to get a feel for the certainty we have? Say somebody posts something on Instagram, it says, this is the best exercise for this. Where can that go wrong?
Yeah, I mean, so with the scientific method, ultimately you're trying to generate new knowledge. So you need to be quite confident if that there's any changes or no changes within your research or your research question. That means you are sure that how you've manipulated the methods, that is the reason why you've ended up with that particular result. So quite a lot of the time, if you look at it from a training program perspective, usually if you're creating two different programs to run simultaneously with two different groups, there's going to be one key difference. Because if you start adding more and more key differences within that, that's going to lead to like, okay, you saw a difference between groups. What do you think the cause of that was? It's like, well, there's about 5 different things. And let's be honest, like training programs and studies as a whole is hard to control. But we want to do our best to try and do that because we want to be sure with, if we're seeing a difference, like what do we propose is the mechanism that's caused that difference? So yeah, one, it's particularly difficult. And to investigate those types of things, you're going to have different levels within it. So you might go from the very in vitro, sort of like in a lab, very controlled setting, and then you've got the in the field, less controlled, but has greater ecological validity. So it's more like the real world scenario that we see. And I often see that both are great and both are necessary. We need studies with more control. We need studies which are a bit more out in the field. But we need them all because each one's going to provide us with a little bit information that creates a story from one end to the other, which is hopefully going to provide us with information that we can create guidelines which people could then use. Once you have the guidelines, they're very much guidelines. When people try to always copy and paste what things say, it often leads to problems. So it either leads to people saying, no, we've got to do this, the guidelines say that, and then there might be some real world scenario which means that maybe the guidelines weren't appropriate at that particular time. Or you'll have people say, those guidelines are rubbish. As well, there might be for your population, but for 99% of the population, it might actually work pretty well. So interpretation of research in general, I think, is one of the biggest problems, because whenever you get a study, they are doing everything they can to control certain things so that if they find a result, they can provide a reason for that particular result. But quite often you'll see in the way they write it, this may cause such and such more research is needed. Then you might have another study that's very similar. So you gather a number of different studies which are investigating a similar question, but there's slight changes to provide an overview of that particular area. But people always try and link everything to one study, which is weird. Like even on social media, you see it. Have you got like a PubMed link for that one? It's like, well, if I'm going to have an opinion, it's usually because of several studies and personal experience. It's never going to be one particular thing, which is, I find a weird way to try and, I think it's used as a bit of a flex. Oh, I disagree with that. So I'm going to do this to make you look inferior. I don't like that approach. I mean, I guess that is the scientific method. It's that pursuit of truth, and it doesn't come from one study, and it often comes from a varieties of different studies coming from either the lab all the way to the real world situations to try and get an understanding as to what is going on. And even then, when you do that, you've got to use critical thinking to say, like, am I going to use these guidelines? Am I going to use these ideas, or am I going to reject them? Because that's what guidelines are for. You using it to form what you believe is going to work and be true in the situation that you are currently in, or the people that you're currently working with. So, yeah, a bit of a whirlwind tour, that one.
No, that was brilliant.
It'd be interesting to see your opinions on that, because you must see it on social media all the time. People, the worst bit is when they go, "Science says so." Yeah. Quite often they're quoting a scientific study they haven't written, and it'll be on sociology. It's like, well, that doesn't count. Not sociological research is bad, but it's just irrelevant in this point. So yeah, it'd be good to hear what your opinions are.
I thought that was a brilliant articulation of it, and I really liked what you said in terms of you have to bear in mind the context of the study. So when a conclusion comes out of a study, all that means is in that study, in that scenario, with those specific people at that point in time, with all the environmental factors that were going on, these were the results that we found. It doesn't even mean that if we repeated the study, we'd get the same results. It's just this is one piece of data, and we can infer some best guesses with a probability rating of how true that is, that if we were to do something similar, we would get this sort of result. But I think people jump to conclusive conclusions far too quickly when actually it's just an indication that this might be the direction of a relationship between a variable and an output. And exactly like you said, people are so keen to demonstrate scientific knowledge that they'll say, I know about this is how it is, and because I can cite a paper, that means I know more than you, so my point of view is more valid than yours, when the person they're arguing with might be a coach who's got 30 years of experience and has actually run like effectively real world experiments over and over and over again, and their pattern matching actually has more validity than this in vitro study where there's a small number of people they tested it on, so you can't extrapolate out with much confidence. And I think the social media age just makes these discussions so much harder because you've got to open and close an argument in a small comment rather than, even now, this is probably the longest that the scientific method has been discussed in the fitness community in the last however long, because we've given it 3 minutes. I completely, really like the way you phrase that, and I don't think I've got too much to add.
If you look at the way it's written, like I said, like people say it may have been this, it may have been that. People often blame academics for like claiming they know all the answers, where if you actually speak to any academics, they are very much, we think it's this, but likely not. They're very sort of open around the limitations of their work, of their knowledge. So it's a shame that in social media it's portrayed as scientists think they know it all, but they don't in the real world. It's such a shame, because ultimately we all need to work together. Like if you're a scientist, you have certain skills. If you're a coach, you have certain skills. And if you try to blend the two, you're probably, I think it's a good mix to do. But if you're working within a football team, you're going to have your data statisticians, you're going to have your coaches, everyone that are key in or very good in key areas, and you come together to find a conclusion. It just seems a bit odd that we aren't all working together to try and figure out what's going on. And that's why I really like collaborating with people, because the more and more you speak, the more and more you remove under the social media gaze and you speak to people, people are kind of on the same lines, but you wouldn't get that from looking at social media. So, I mean, something you said, Ash, in terms of like, if we do the study again, would you get the same results? And that's probably something that the scientific community doesn't do enough. Like, okay, do the same study again, but it's likely not going to get published because the editors might think, it's been done before, etc., etc. And there's more and more of people not trying to publish null results, so they didn't find anything, because they feel that it's not a snazzy headline.
It skews the data there massively, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It skews the amount of information that's readily available for people to look at. So if you do 10 studies and 1 find positive results and 9 find nothing, but the only ones that have been published are the positive results, you're going to have a skewed idea of what is the reason that, what's caused the positive results. You're going to lean too much into it.
I think it's
really not different to social media to that.
No.
It's basically the same principle as social media, where the more attention-grabbing, sort of controversial points of view get more airtime. Scientists are incentivized to do new research and to publish things that contradict what we currently think. Whereas anything they do which actually is still useful to reconfirm a point of view and back up a study with more data to the same conclusion, they don't get much airtime. It's probably not so good for their reputation, so they're less likely to be bothered about doing the work and or publishing it. So it's interesting. I've never sort of thought about that parallel, but even the scientific community is susceptible to those cognitive biases.
And under pressure to publish, because you'll have not so much it varies between different universities, but if you have like a very research heavy university, which are typically the universities in the top half of the university sort of league table, you'll have lecturers there that on research contracts, they are obliged to bring in a certain amount of money each month through grants. They are obliged to publish a certain amount of research per year. And if you don't meet those targets, then you can lose your research contract. So what you're going to do, you think that real scientific creativity takes time, but you're put under pressure to publish just a lot of stuff. So, and that's not to say that, you know, everything that gets published is not as good as it could be. That's not true at all. But it definitely, I do wonder how the pressures that the academic community is under limits the amount of work that they can do.
I think this kind of really stems right back to the very start where you mentioned about the creator thing, and it's like posting every day versus actually posting something of value. And it's like that thing of someone making one bit of content which is unreal, you know, edited to the T once a week, compared to the person that's in your face every single day. And the person that's in your face every single day is front of mind, and they're going to be the first person you think of when you say, even if you think about fitness, right? Something as broad as that. Someone that keeps showing up in Instagram stories is going to be, if I think of someone to do say strength, I'd probably think, okay, this is the person, bodybuilding, right? This is the person, even though they might not be the best person to give me what I want, but because they're front of mind and the person only posts once a week, and it is that battle between, do you play up to the algorithm so you can be front of mind, but then all the time you put into that daily content takes away from the top quality content. And that's exactly the thing you're just saying with the researchers. It's like they have to be producing so that they can keep the money coming through the doors, and it's tough.
Yeah, it's tough. I think the world is moving too quickly in general.
Yeah.
That's a very deep philosophical way of thinking, and probably a whole new podcast. But I think everyone is under pressure to do more in whatever profession they're in, and it limits what creativity we can do.
Well, you say that, and I think a really good example. I said to you at the start of the podcast before we went on, and like the style of training, concurrent training, and like doing multiple styles of training, because we can. So we want to then challenge our body in all these different ways and do multiple different things, rather than kind of just focusing on one, because we can. And it's that thing of, you say the world's moving so fast, and it's like we're just trying to keep up, and we're just trying to, because we know we don't have as much time on this earth that we might say would like, so we're trying to get as much done that we can make sure we're exposing ourselves to as much as possible, so we can create those memories, create the stresses on the body that we can enjoy. And
I'm terrible at perceiving how long things will take. So that would take me 2 hours.
Yeah.
And you think, I'm going to do this, because I've got time. I've got a whole day to do it. Oh, I've done half of it. It's now 5 p.m. It's my own fault. Yeah. Because I'm motivated at a certain point. But
yeah, completely. Are there any, just thinking for the listeners to really hammer that point home, are there any big recurring contradictions you see in terms of common perception? Like, what's something that a lot of people believe to be true, which is just completely not evidenced in the research? Anything that really grinds your gears that you see again and again?
I guess you've got to really know the research area to really understand if it's a misconception or not. And I asked this to the guys at Omnia the other day around, so I obviously follow a certain amount of people on social media. So I see people posting about hybrid training as well, because I want to see what's happening in the space. But none of them seem to be going, the interference effect is a really bad thing. You can't train resistance training and running at the same time, for example, because you'll lose all your gains. That seems to be the common one. And that was one of the reasons why my last series of my podcast was focused on that, because I wanted to figure out where this idea came from. But it's very rare where I see people make that statement. So then I asked, and they were like, well, technically you're picking your echo chamber by the people that you are choosing to follow. So no wonder I'm not seeing this, because I probably follow friends and coaches who I respect their ideas and stuff. So usually not going to come up with some outlandish quote that is a misconception. But in terms of the misconception of the interference effect, I think it's got to a point where it's probably talked about so much that people misunderstand how it's been defined. So it's then led to people defining it in their own way. So when people think of the interference effect, they think of straight away towards muscular signaling. So molecular signaling theory around, you've got the mTOR pathway activating protein synthesis. AMPK comes along when you start doing exercise or aerobic exercise, and it tries to inhibit it in some way. But at the same time, that might occur, but you see no interference effect at all in your overall programming. So, but really, if you actually look at the studies, because of the way they've designed the study, strength training only versus combined, see a decrement in certain variables like dynamic muscular strength. They start to think, okay, there's a difference there. That is the interference effect. But we know that difference might have come from so many different factors. Some of it might be molecular, some of it might be fatigue, some of it might be just how the program is organized. Some of it might be outside factors that you can't really control, like logistics, family time, all of those types of things. So people talk about the interference effect like it's this one not magic thing. It's like this dastardly evil thing that tries to interrupt your training program. But really, it's just a multitude of things, and trying to fully define it as one thing is unnecessary for most people. The more and more I look into it, the more and more I start to think that the body is such a sponge that novices don't even notice it. Intermediates can have some level of interference, but if they've programmed right, they're not going to notice it. So they're just going to increase anyway. It might take a bit longer, but that doesn't matter. You're doing two things at once. Just program appropriately, and then you'll probably get to the same level. And then it's only once you reach the proper elite level where you start to see it. So, for example, if you're a competitive swimmer and you're swimming like 8-10 hours, well, it'd be more than that, 12, 14 hours a week, and then you try and add in some resistance training sessions to try and increase your size, and you see no difference, you might think, oh yeah, there's an interference effect. Well, yeah, because you are operating at the elite level. You might need to be really, really particular at how you organize your training to try and avoid that interference effect. But like 99% of people aren't even at that level. And most people, I definitely put myself in this bracket, that I reckon I could get to a certain level of strength, and I would reach that certain level of strength whether if I did aerobic training or not. Because just genetically, I don't have that ability to reach the levels that I wish I could. And I think a lot of people are like that, and you get these elite freaks that are absolutely amazing and can break that barrier. But most people will probably reach that whether they're combined training or not.
Yeah,
that's a really good example.
And I think with most people, as you say, there is they can just get away with it and it'll be fine, because most people it won't matter, and we get so bogged down in the details that we then don't even give ourselves the opportunity to really see what we're capable of, because we're trying to make it either too perfect or we then just don't start at all. And it's funny because you see it in the training community a lot, that training is now, especially since how CrossFit really made beyond the gym walls a thing. And like, you look at your recovery, you look at your nutrition, and the everyday person now thinks of himself as quite a high level athlete. And in the stark reality, it was just, we're not. Like, unless you're paid to compete at the highest level, and that is your sole focus, then most of the time we have so many other stresses coming into our lives anyway that we're probably not taking into consideration, that they're probably the things that be moving the needles more than us worrying about any interference between some running and some squats. So it is crazy because it's analysis by paralysis by analysis, right? Where you get so bogged down with all this information, and because of bringing about social media, but because of social media's because of social media and the prevalence of information out there, trying to decipher it all and understand like what is the right thing to be looking to say follow, or who should I be listening to, and then it's just like, fuck, I don't know what to do. I'm just not going to do anything. It's just easier.
Yeah. I think that's the hybrid training and interference effect is the perfect illustration of the difficulty we face with the scientific method, because it is so multifactorial. There are so many variables we need to consider that play into whether somebody does better or worse with combined or separate training. And, like, I think this is probably a nice thought exercise for us. Like, what do you think, if you were to set up an experiment to try and tease out the interference effect, how would you control for the various variables? Like, because like you said, there's so many things that we should be considering. Obviously, overall program volume, recovery, training age, experience in the movements. So, if you had a magic wand and an unlimited budget, what would be the test you would run to try and understand at least one aspect of the interference effect?
It's hard to narrow it down to one. There's a few questions I'd like to investigate if I had money and time. And we got some great studies going with our masters at the moment, but they are kind of limited on time as well. So quite often it's like an intervention. It'll be like 4 to like 12 weeks max. What I would love to test is my idea that if you just program appropriately, that you would get to the same level as someone that's like doing strength only, but you just take longer to get there. So, for example, I'd have like 3 groups. One would be like a powerlifting group, strength only. One would be like a combined. 4 groups. Sorry, one would be endurance only. One would be a combined where they do both the strength and the endurance at the same time. So it's like the same as that Hickson paper from the 1980s. It's double the amount of volume, which they petered out around week 7 because they were knackered. And then I would do something else where I would match the sort of total volume of the single groups, but it's a combined group as well. Yeah. So what you're going to see is that they are going to improve in strength much. The gradient's going to be much slower, but the idea is that gradient, despite being the slope not as steep, will just keep going on for longer. You probably need to change certain things as well. Whereas I'd probably keep the endurance and the strength lot just to go, or just to keep on increasing as hard as they could, and they will start to plateau as you would. So it's just a way of kind of demonstrating that appropriate training is probably the most important thing here, and give yourself time and you can overcome any deficits. And then whether it's an interference effect or not, it's not, because even at the 8-week part, you're going to see a difference, but we've accounted for that because we're taking our time with it. It's a bit of a loose study, that would be very hard to control, probably very easily critiqued at peer review level, but I think it would prove my point. And then the other one would be around the molecular signaling theory. Because if you're looking at whether AMPK inhibits mTOR, like the research around that is very, very mixed. Not mixed in the methodological quality, but by the results. So you've got some studies which have shown that it completely reduces the mTOR pathway if you do like Wingate sprints on a bike before or after. But then you've got others which have shown, like if you do some interval training or some continuous training after resistance training, you get an increase in AMPK, but there's nothing to say that it actually inhibits the mTOR pathway. I mean, the level of the athlete is going to affect that as well. But what I would like to see is that we get someone on the combined program and just see that they're getting stronger and stronger in very gross measures. So it could be isometric mid-thigh pull, it could be a squat. But I would like to see if there is an actual molecular interference effect. But when you're measuring something so global as like a full body exercise, you don't even notice it, because if you think about it, that molecular signaling theory is affecting your muscle cells, but there are nerve cells, lymph cells, there are all sorts of other cells which also respond to stress from training. And so we are assuming that we're going to see decrements in squat strength based on one small thing. Yeah, it's important, but it's still one thing. So I think we can, if we can get to a point where we can prove that molecular signaling theory, the interference effect actually is occurring, but performance is not decreasing. So I think for most people, as long as you manage your fatigue, which you would in any type of training, you would not see the this interference effect at all anyway.
That's very cool. Yeah, I think we touched on this in the last podcast, but that is the first study is the ultimate question of kind of CrossFit mixed modal training. Is if you run things in parallel, do you end up a rounded, fitter, better athlete sooner than if you run things in isolation? And I think if you could set that study up well and control for everything, like fatigue, overall training volume, nutrition, like stick everyone in a training camp and control all their food, like, and all that sort of stuff. If you could get that answered clearly, then it could potentially revolutionize the way people periodize and train for mixed modal competitions, because it might be faster to get somebody's numbers up across the boards doing one at a time, or it might be faster to take a slower gradient, but you end up rounded and better all round sooner long term.
I find CrossFit is really cool because you're trying to learn so many things at once. It's like forced microdosing in a number of different things. So you end up not being able to do, like you said, where you're focusing on one element, then you move straight onto the other one, because you just would negate loads of different types of training, which you just need consistent exposure to. So yeah, I mean, microdosing is getting more and more popular in other sports as well. So CrossFit isn't microdosing, but there's similarities there to me. So I think they've almost popularized it. I also like how CrossFit has redefined what is good. So people are snatching like 120, 130, whereas years ago we were like, that's amazing, that guy's like elite level. But now it's good, because you realize like just how many other things you can progress at. So, people snatching 170, 180 at the, world weightlifting, world stage, European stage, that's elite. CrossFit, they're good. So me snatching like 80 and 90 is well below average, So I'm not even at that point to worry about any interference effect, because I'm not even good yet.
You know when you said there though about how, like, with that study, that would be great to see. You can kind of look at, say, a weightlifter that solely focuses on weightlifting and just does that, and then gets to that elite level, as you say, snatching 180. But then you're looking at these CrossFitters that are getting extremely close to that, but can also do all this other stuff at the same time. You're like, just imagine, like, look at, say, like Matt Fraser's example. Like, look at, say, the quality of his snatch and how much did his strength really deteriorate, even though he spent a massive block of his life obviously just doing weightlifting. Like, his strength still kept going up then at a slower rate, but that's because he was very close to, say, his genetic potential of, say, with his weightlifting. But you're like, you're looking at now the skill and like the strength of these athletes in something like CrossFit, and especially like when you look into like the women's side of things as well, like, as you said, like the standards for women, like how strong, like they're stronger than most men, and that's the thing. And you're just like, you're watching how they're just throwing weights around. You're like, and I remember watching one of the documentaries, and they was like, you're watching like 2010 versus like 2020, and like just now they're repping out like what they did for just about 1RMs, and that's like in like 10 years of like just fitness. And like, it is a massive case study in itself, CrossFit, really, and just watching what the body is capable of. And every year, as you say, like they keep getting stronger, fitter, pushing the bodies even more. At what point is it they've pushed them so far?
Yeah, I don't know where that are they going to hit a ceiling? I have no idea. It seems to be the odd WOD
Yeah.
where they will have which seems to go a bit too far, which usually is like high rep gymnastics under fatigue, and then all of a sudden you get loads of like chest ruptures,
Yeah.
where I think they've just gone a bit too
Yeah.
far. But I don't know. I don't know where that's the exciting thing. I don't know where that limit is, and I don't want to know because I just want to keep looking.
Yeah.
If you find it, then it'll be boring.
Yeah.
Yeah, something you're both saying there got me thinking that the game for the individual athletes, so someone like Matt Fraser, is we always talk about your maximum recoverable volume and your recovery budget. Like you've got so much training that you can recover from in a week. And the way I think about it from a CrossFit programming point of view, it's almost you're investing that recovery budget for the best returns. And in CrossFit, because you have a budget, you can only spend it on so many things. Depending on how close you are to elite, the return on time and recovery invested is going to vary quite a lot. So Matt Fraser continuing to work on his Olympic weightlifting, there's actually quite a low ROI on training time and recovery budget invested. Whereas if he could find something that he's relatively bad at in his game, like remember when he was not so fit and not so fast, and then he went all in on sprints and running, and then he got a lot better and his CrossFit performance benefited loads for, if he allocated 2 to 4 hours a week on that versus 2 to 4 hours a week on weightlifting in terms of positions on the leaderboard, that's a huge change. And I think that's the way that CrossFit coaches should be thinking about things in terms of where's the low hanging fruit, where can I level up my CrossFit performance most easily. And generally, it's the things that you're most deficient at that you get the best ROIs because your body has so much room to improve. Whereas if you're already very good, like if you're an excellent runner coming into CrossFit, getting a faster 5K run probably isn't going to get you positions up the leaderboard. But if you're not very strong, then going from a 100 kilo snatch to a 120 snatch probably is.
Yeah, definitely. It's really, just like we were saying regarding the amount of energy required to increase that snatch at that top level is really, really quite hard. Hence why you have to go all in with it. Whereas you could probably still do or maintain or even improve very slightly, but still have at least some battery to improve massively in other areas. It will be. We are at that level where we're starting to see that people are kind of reaching their genetic potential, I think, at multiple things at once. Whereas, because the CrossFit game, they used to have certain athletes which do really well in some events and then poorer at others. And then all of a sudden, Matt Fraser came and started being in the top 10 of every event. Same with Tia. And that's changed what the top people are. They'd have, or they call it no weaknesses or whatever it is. It's just, they've kind of reached nearer the ceiling of good in lots of different things. And I guess prioritizing training in different ways based on how much sort of energy resources you have available is going to help you achieve that.
Big time. Phil, one thing I wanted to ask you about as well, I've seen some things about you writing a book. Is that right? And could you tell us anything about it at this early stage?
Yeah, so the book is an overview of hybrid training and all the stuff that I learned from season 5 of the Progress Theory. So I've had chapters where I've looked at what is this interference effect and all the different things that could contribute to that and how we need to be a bit more wary of what an interference effect is and how that can influence training. I'm just kind of finalizing some ideas around sort of planning the week and sort of long-term planning. But it's kind of like a science popular book based on all the work that I did with the podcast. So hopefully that will come out this summer. I'm just going through a busy period at work, so hopefully I'll do that. It's been an interesting write because I never wanted to have it of like, follow this and you will be better at hybrid training. I just wanted to highlight key things that I think are important. And then, it's up to the reader to incorporate them into a training program. So yeah, if you're looking to buy something where it's going to tell you how to train, I don't think it's going to do that, but it's definitely going to give you the knowledge to make better decisions in your programming.
Great. So is it more for a coach, would you say, then, to understand what they would be giving their clients, or the very keen hybrid athlete?
Yeah, I've written it for, I guess, they sometimes called the weekend warriors, where they're good at training and want to learn a bit more, coaches, that type of thing. So it's not a textbook, far from it. It's not a textbook at all. But it only elaborates on key research to highlight key points that I'm trying to say. So it's not like some huge research dense type of textbook. It's a popular science book, which hopefully will generate some ideas around hybrid training. And it'd be cool to do another one on CrossFit, because I've kind of focused on, you've got resistance training and endurance training. So more like someone going for like a training to be a triathlete and a powerlifter. Whereas obviously CrossFit is different. And I think there's a few different things you'd have to incorporate if you did a book on that. But that would be cool to do in the future.
Definitely.
Looking forward to that.
The Arnold's Encyclopedia for CrossFit would be probably even longer than his one. That's brilliant. And we didn't quite get into it earlier. Considering dad life and reviewing your priorities, how are you training at the moment with all this hybrid knowledge in your head? How does that manifest into reality?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, because I keep going back and forth with what I want to do. So, funny enough, in the first chapter of the book, I talk about when I ruptured my ACL during a weightlifting competition, and then I had 3 subsequent knee surgeries. So I had 4 knee surgeries in 4.5 years. And I came out of that just wanting to do loads of different training, because I missed it, because I spent so long rehabbing. I just wanted to do loads of different things, and I wanted to get into a period where I was robust enough. And if a mate at the pub said like, "All right, we're doing a half marathon in 3 weeks. Want to do it?" Yeah, right. I'm not going to win or anything, but I'd have the capacity to do it. And then when I really lent into the hybrid training, especially with the podcast, I tried to lean a little bit more towards wanting to hit certain hybrid type goals. But in doing so, I realized just how much commitment you've got to do for that. And if I really want to push as an academic, like writing papers takes a long time. So I want to sort of lean into that a bit more. I like the coaching side of it rather than the athlete side. So I've not moved away from it. I still do those practices, but a lot of my training would be like, for example, I'm trying to structure a new testing method on the bike, which I think would be quite good for identifying, I don't know, maybe training zones for training for a hybrid athlete, as an example. So I can't just throw in loads of random testing, but I think by testing myself and trying different things, I'll be able to provide information which I can provide others, which I think is more what I want to achieve. So I would never be the athlete, but I am the sort of like a hybrid athlete, just enjoys training. And then as the boy's been born, it made me realize just how flexible I want to be with that. So, with youth athletes, they encourage them to try as many different sports, to learn as many different skills, to accrue many different adaptations, especially leading up to like 15, 16, before they start to focus on a particular sport. And then you do your sport, and then people sort of like just stop, or like, well, I want to get back into training. So it made sense. It makes sense to me that maybe that you do that general GPP. Maybe you then go to a particular sport once you hit like 18, maybe into your sort of mid to late 30s, unless you're Djokovic, which will probably be 50. And then you might move back into a bit more of a hybrid / generalist as you're older. And I just want to keep my training as variable as possible, so I can then show the different types of training to my child. I don't want to be someone that only does certain types of training, the same training all the time, because then I'm biasing them towards a certain type of training. I just want to do lots of different types of training, different types of sports, to expose them into different skill learning. So I think that's one thing. It's great to like train to show like, oh, daddy's training. It's like a thing that we do, but try and train in different ways to expose them to different sports. That's what my aim is, I think, really now. So it's more around testing and learning and just trying different things out, so I can hopefully encourage my son to do different types of sports when he's supposed to be going through that phase of learning different things.
It's funny how you when as you said, when you have a kid, the reflection process of like that you reflect on why you do certain things and like how is that going to impact them, and like we mentioned earlier, but like especially with the training, like for me, I love the fact that my daughter can go and see me training in the gym, that she can see my wife training gym, and it's a normal thing that like. And I remember when she was born, I was like, we both said like, what would we want to get her into? And we was like, right, we want her to probably do gymnastics and swimming. So it's quite a full body thing, good proprioception, swimming just because it's a good skill to have. And we was thinking about all these things for her. And it's just like, it's amazing how we don't necessarily always do that for ourselves. And it's funny how you're saying there is in like bringing yourselves back to that GPP phase. And it's like, it's how I personally like to train. It's like I have a bias towards more strength and bodybuilding style training because I enjoy that. But I also really enjoy being able to do pretty much anything. And that for me is a really important thing so that, as you say, like if my daughter says to me, or my son when he's older, like, can you do this? I'm like, well, yeah, I can do this. And I can then show them how to do it and stuff like that. And that for me, I think it's that leading by example, right? It feels I'm really like passionate about the thought of them being older and me still being able to do most things and being able to guide them through it and be part of it, and just so that it's such a funny mindset shift. And until we had our daughter the first time, it's not something you really think about, and it's not even something that it's really hard to explain, but it's just you have such a paradigm shift.
It's a weird feeling, isn't it? Because if I do any type of hybrid training, it's because I want to achieve this, I want to achieve that. It's very much for you. Then all of a sudden, this little person comes along, and you think, well, I'm not going to set the world alight if I, achieve this particular goal in this triathlon.
Yeah.
But by me attempting this triathlon, my boy can come along and see what it's like. That to me is a bigger win.
Yeah.
So yeah, because what's the ultimate aim? Is to provide the lifestyle that you want for your kid to be able to achieve anything they want.
Yeah.
So
we like the only reason I was prepping for a powerlifting competition at the end of the year, and I was talking to my dad, who generally does a lot of like Ironman and stuff like that, and he said, I was like, what? I went out for a cycle, and I was like, Dad, what triathlons are you doing this year? And he gave me a bunch, and I was like, I'm not doing a half Ironman. He goes, but I'm doing the London Triathlon, and I was like, okay, it's about 12 weeks away, stuff like that. I was like, do you know what? I could probably prep for that. And the first thing that like we said to my daughter was, oh, you can go and watch Daddy and Granddad go and do this race. And and she was like, oh yeah, like the excitement got there. And that for me is that thing of watching like her granddad and her dad compete. And like, in this, even though again, you say I don't really care about my finish time per se. Obviously I would like to beat my dad, but it's unlikely. But I think that's such a good thing. And then like Hannah said, sports day is coming up, and I'm like, I'm going to take down some names. If they have a race, I'm going there. Like, that has always been at the back of my mind, that when sports day comes by, because when I was a kid, I was not athletic. I was not into any type of fitness or anything. So now's my time to shine. I'm taking down the other dads, and I'm making sure my daughter knows it.
I hope you showboat when you win.
Yeah, Usain Bolt celebrate before the finish line. It's a really interesting concept, I think you're talking about there, Phil, about giving them all the optionality. So giving them a general base and exposure to lots of different things so that they have freedom to choose whatever suits them or whatever they enjoy the most. And when you look at the sort of the goats of sport, quite often that wasn't offered, and they've been pushed into a sport super early to specialize. And it goes back to what you were saying as well about what are you optimizing for? Are you optimizing for them to be the best they could possibly be at one single sport? are you optimizing for them to be a nice rounded athlete and enjoy sport as an amateur athlete? And it's a lot of pressure to kind of, like, everything you do, like Rob said, is going to have a big influence on them, because they see you can't not influence their perception of sport in some way, shape or form. So even if it's your personal preference for a certain style of training, they'll probably pick it up. And the degree to which you're deliberate about that, it's going to happen one way or the other. So can you skew it deliberately for a certain outcome? And I don't know. I don't think we really know the answer to how it really works, but I just thought it was cool that you're thinking about it already. And
well, they say those who can't teach, and I think, I've always wanted to be really good at sport, especially growing up. There's different times where I've tried to like put more eggs in one basket to be good at sport, and it's never worked out. And it's that realization is that actually probably the thing I've excelled in is teaching. I've been teaching at university for over 13 years. So why don't I use that thing I've excelled in to try and help my boy? I call him the future world champion. And I genuinely don't care if he's a future world champion in something or whatever it is. I don't care. But I just think it's a nice nickname that hopefully I can provide curiosity in him, that he will learn as much as he possibly can. I think that's it. I think before anything can occur, you need curiosity. I talk about being creative, all of that type of thing. But if you're not curious, you have no interest in investigating further. So curiosity is the first thing. So if I can install that in him, then I feel like I've won.
Yeah.
I think it's a lovely place to wrap it up. Thank you so much, Phil. That was incredible again. For the listeners who want to know more about you, please could you tell us where they can find it?
Yeah, I guess I post most at Dr. Phil Price, which is on Instagram. And I have my podcast, The Progress Theory. So we're on Instagram, and we have our YouTube channel for that, which I will be developing a lot more in the upcoming months, especially as I release the book and we're moving into the next season, which will hopefully spawn off a lot more books, which is the aim. So definitely check out The Progress Theory on YouTube.
Thanks for coming on. I thoroughly enjoyed today's episode, and I'm really looking forward to reading your book when that comes out. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to please share on all your social medias. Don't forget to tag us at Lunge and Lift as well, and head over to YouTube, subscribe, like, share, and all that good stuff. If you're on Apple Podcasts, we would love it if you would leave a review. And if you're on Spotify, a cheeky 5 stars are helping us grow and get us better guests and get us even better content. And if also you're looking for some new kit to kind of give you some summer wear, check out wit-fitness.com for all your wit kit and use code LL15 to get 15% off your purchase. And if you're looking for any blood flow restriction apparel, head over to Hytro and use the code LL20 and save yourself 20%. Right. Thank you very much, guys, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, guys.